Hello, hello, hello. Please let me know if I am audible. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If you can, if you can hear me, please do let me know. Hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If I am audible, if you can hear me, please let me know. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right. Okay. All right. All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I've gotten some feedback that it is audible, so we are just going to dive straight into our lesson for the evening. This evening, we are looking at logic and critical thinking. Logic and critical thinking. And I'm going to be explaining the justification or the basis for taking this route. All right. The first thing to say is that it is almost counterintuitive, it's almost ironic to speak of logic and critical thinking with politics in the same sentence. Politics, the political arena, is not known for being an arena for logic and for soundness of reasoning and thinking, and generally the political arena is not known for anything that is intellectually rigorous in terms of how people frame their positions. And so when we are talking about logic and critical thinking, I can imagine that some people are wondering, how is that going to get us far? If that gets us anywhere, where can that get us? Politics is a game of emotion, it's a game of twisted psychology or manipulation of people's psyche and sentiments, and it's a game of a lot of rhetorics, and it's a game with a lot of where you have so much of sound bites without so much of substance. Generally, we know that logic is not like the strong point when it comes to how politics is run, and that's not just a Nigerian problem. It's a global situation, and so we are looking at logic and critical thinking in the context now of politics, and I'm going to be explaining why I still think that we need to do logic and critical thinking, even as we try to process our political engagement. Now, one of the things that is not obvious to so many people is that even though on the surface a lot of political talk is carried on without serious appeal to logic and to reasoning, critical reasoning, it does not mean that the arena is completely devoid, at least not from the back end. And by that, I'm trying to say that there is always a logic behind the position that most of the people who matter they take. But how they express that position is what doesn't come off with a lot of logic. So there's always a logic. So people have a way that they process their position. There's a way that they process their position, but then the way that they express that position is not always couched in the most logically rigorous language. So it is important as Christians for us to understand the logic that is behind some of the political posturing that we see in the public arena. When people are talking and they are appealing to emotion or they are appealing to some kind of sentiment, as Christians, if we are careful and we look beneath the surface, we would be able to find out that there is an underlying logic that has inspired the appeal to emotion or the appeal to some kind of base sentiment that people are expressing in terms of how they are putting for their political position. It's like somebody saying we need to increase the volume. Is everybody feeling that the volume needs to be increased a little more? If you think we need to increase the volume, we can try to do that. But I would imagine that from my end, this volume looks good enough. Okay, so we're just going to dive in. But don't forget the point I have made. The point I have made is that behind all of the illogicality, behind the sentiments, behind the emotionalism, behind all the other kinds of illogical or fallacious appeals that people make when they are trying to sell a political position, there's always a logic behind it. There's always a logic that is behind it. That logic is not expressed logically, but that logic is what informs the illogicality that people use in expressing their position. Let me say that again. So somebody has decided logically, or at least by some form of reasoning, that they are deserving of a particular political position or political place or political rule or political chance. And the way they arrived at that might be logical, but the way they are going to sell that position to their demography is not normally going to be the same way they arrived at the position. If you get the point I'm making, they are now going to have to resort to something less rigorous in terms of intellectual demands, or in terms of the reasoning and the energy of mind that is needed to process it. So they are just going to find something that works for people. Maybe you are simply going to appeal to religion, or you are going to appeal to tribe, or you're going to appeal to just our base head instinct. But the people who are the shakers and the movers, the ideologues, have not arrived at that position exclusively by these non-logical pathways. Number two is to say that as Christians, when we go into politics, and if we go into politics, it's also important to understand how to process things at the back end, to say, how do we arrive at this? Is this a tenable position? Is this a justified position? If you can justify a particular position from a logical standpoint, then you can now look for how to present that position in a way that is not logically dishonest, but in a way also that does not simply comfort as the bare bones of logic, because you already know that the bare bones of logic is not the way you are going to get a lot of attention out there with the masses and the electorate. So for those two reasons, it's very critical that we are very careful in terms of how we are doing what we are doing every time that we are going into politics. And then it's also important that we understand the logic that is behind the position that a lot of other people are pushing, even if the way they are pushing it does not appear to have a lot of logic behind it. So those are the three things to say before we start to go into the proper meat of our class this evening. The first thing I said was that it's a little bit erroneous, or it's a little bit counterintuitive that we're talking about logic and critical thinking while we are thinking about faith and politics, simply because logic and critical thinking are not known to be strong points in the political arena. Number two, I said that even though number one appears to be valid, which is that a lot of people, politicians, ideologues, when they make political statements, they normally don't couch their political statement in the most logical languages. Nevertheless, those positions have been arrived at by some kinds of logic. That logic could be faulty, that logic could be valid, it could be sound, but there is a more rigorous process by which people have arrived at those positions. But they don't sell their position on the same basis that they arrived at a position. So they first arrive at a position by employing some kind of logic, and then they look for the most popularly appealing way to spread that position to the electorate and to the populace. So for that reason, it's also important to understand the way that logic works. Number three, we said that even as Christians and people of faith, it's important that in our political engagement that we are very aware of the logical and the intellectual and the philosophical and ideological underpinnings that are involved in the issues that we are working through and that we are thinking through, so that if we are engaging politically, we can have very valid, logically reasoned positions, and then we can now think of the best way to sell that position in the public that is not logically dishonest. It is not coming forth as a class in logic. So logic, whether you like it or not, is something that we cannot do without. Those are the preliminary statements, and then we can get straight into our subject. So when we talk about logic, what exactly is logic? What is logic? Logic basically is the science of analyzing or appraising arguments so as to separate bad reasoning from good reasoning. So in logic, we are trying to analyze arguments so that we can separate bad reasoning from good reasoning. So we call this class logic and critical thinking. Critical thinking is, is reasoning in a way that is valid, is reasoning in a way that is good. So logic is a science, is the art of analyzing or appraising or evaluating arguments so that we can separate bad reasoning from good reasoning. That's what logic is. But in this definition of logic, when I say it is about analyzing, appraising, or evaluating arguments so that we can separate bad reasoning from good reasoning, it's important, therefore, to explain what an argument is. Properly speaking, an argument is not a quarrel. An argument is not banter, right? An argument is not disagreement in that sense. An argument simply, in an intellectual sense, an argument is a set of statements comprising of premises that lead to a conclusion. An argument is a set of statements comprising of premises that lead to a conclusion. So the truth is that even though the word argument has a bad name on the street, the word argument is actually the way to avoid quarrel. So if you want to avoid quarreling, the best way to do that is to have good arguments, because an argument is a set of statements that comprise of premises that now lead to a conclusion. So we've come from logic being the science of analyzing, appraising, evaluating arguments so as to separate bad reasoning from good reasoning. And if logic is about the appraisal of argument, what are arguments? I said that an argument is a set of statements comprising of premises that lead to a conclusion. In this definition of an argument also, therefore, you see the idea of premises, you see the idea of statements, and then you see the idea of a conclusion. What are premises? Premises are statements that provide supporting evidence to what is being argued or to what is being claimed or to what is being proposed. So your premises are the statement that provides supporting evidence in your argument. So the premises are what provide supporting evidence to what you are trying to claim. And your conclusion is a statement of the claim that is being supported by the premises. So you use premises to support the conclusion. So your conclusion is a statement of the claim that the premises are meant to support. So premises, they provide supporting evidence to what is being claimed. And a conclusion is a statement of the claim that is being supported by premises. In a very simple way or simplistic way would be to say that premises provide supporting evidence for the conclusion, and the conclusion is what is supported by the premises. All right. Now, all of these are things that involve statements. So in an argument is a set of statements. Premises are statements that provide supporting evidence. Conclusion is a statement of the claim that is being supported by the premises. So what is a statement? A statement is a sentence that is either true or false. I want to say that again. A statement is a sentence that is either true or false. So that ideally every statement is a sentence, but every sentence is not necessarily a statement. A statement needs to have the property of truth or falsehood in order to qualify as a statement. So a statement is a sentence that is either true or false. So if I say, is this your cup? Is this your cup? That is a sentence, but it's not a statement. Is this your cup? That sentence does not have the property of being either true or false. It's simply a question. But if I say, this is your cup, then that is a statement. It's not just a sentence. It is a sentence, and it is also a statement because it has a quality of being either true or false. Because it could be the truth that this is your cup, and it could be the truth that, or it could be false, in which case this is not your cup. So that's a statement. And statements are the building blocks of an argument, because arguments are statements that comprise of premises leading to conclusion. Premises are statements that provide supporting evidence to what is being claimed. Conclusion is a statement of the claim that is being supported by the premises. So it's important to know what a statement is. So a statement is a sentence that is either true or false. Something else that we need to define as we go on is a proposition. A proposition. A proposition is the information content of a statement. The information content of a statement is a proposition. And then there is what we call an assertion. An assertion is an unsubstantiated statement of claim. An unsubstantiated statement of claim. So, if you were to cut out the conclusion in an argument, and you made it a standalone sentence, in almost every case, that simply becomes an assertion. All right? In every case, that simply becomes an assertion. If somebody walked up to you and they were to say, I am a better golfer than you, or I'm a better footballer than you are, that is an assertion. It is a statement but it is a statement that is making a claim that is not substantiated. So there is no evidence for what is being asserted. There's no evidence for what is being asserted. So when somebody says, I'm a better footballer than you are, and that's all that they say, there isn't any way to tell how did you arrive at that, right? How did you arrive at that? So, but if there is supporting evidence that was given on the basis of which the conclusion therefore is that I am therefore a better footballer than you, what you would have would be an argument. But if all you have is I'm a better footballer than you, that is ideally supposed to be the conclusion of in an argument, because we said an argument comprised basically of premises and a conclusion. The premises, they give supporting evidence to the conclusion or to the thing that is being claimed, and the conclusion is a statement of the claim that is being supported by the premises. An assertion is therefore like a conclusion without premises. So it's a statement that makes a claim, but how that claim is arrived out at is not stated in the statement. That is what an assertion is. So we have looked at what logic is, we've considered what an argument is, we have looked at premises, we've looked at conclusion, we've looked at statement, we've defined what a proposition is, we have defined what an assertion is, right? So an argument will take the form at the most simple level will be something like John is human. All right? John is human. And then that's like first premise. First premise, we say that John is human. Second premise, we can say that all men are human. We say John is a man. All men are human. Therefore, John is human. So premise 1, John is a man. Premise 2, all men are human. Premise, therefore, conclusion, John is human. So you go from premises to conclusion. We say all men are human. Men are human. It has that exact quality. It can be either true or false. All men are human is a statement of a claim. And then we say John is a man. All right, that's our second premise. Now, this is also a statement. This sentence, John is a man, is a statement that can be either true or false. It's a sentence that can be either true or false. Therefore, it qualifies as a statement. And then the conclusion is, therefore, John is human. All right. Now, this is the conclusion. So in this form of argument, the conclusion always comes in the form of therefore. So you have premise 1, premise 2, conclusion in this argument. Premise 1, all men are human. Premise 2, John is a man. Conclusion, therefore John is human. This is like the way that an argument can be put, formally speaking. An argument have the general property of being valid or being sound or any of the two. So an argument can be valid, an argument can be sound, an argument, if an argument is sound, it has to be valid. An argument may be valid and not sound, but an argument cannot be sound and not be valid. So when somebody says, that's not a valid argument, that's not a valid argument, well, sometimes the argument is actually valid. It's just that the argument is not sound. And you are going to understand the difference between a valid argument and a sound argument as we go on. So I'm saying that a simple example of an argument is all men are human, John is a man, therefore John is human. This is the format of an argument. So an argument is not a quarrel. An argument is not being disagreeable. An argument is not shouting at each other. An argument is not being very brazen. So when we talk of an argument, it has a bad connotation on the street, but intellectually or academically speaking, an argument is a very positive thing. It's a beautiful thing. It is arguments that prevent you. When you have a good argument, you don't need to employ violence. When you have a good argument, then you don't need to shout so much. When you have a good argument, you don't need to be you don't need to engage in all kinds of indecent behavior. Most times, people become very hyper defensive. What network? Is it network or? All right, so the sound is back, right? All right, the sound is back. Okay, the last things I was saying was to say that it's important that we embrace the idea of argument because that's what really saves us from having to expend a lot of energy in being overly defensive, in being angry, in getting very worked up, and in even employing violence. If you have a good argument, you have really no need to resort to violence. It is when your argument is not good, then you need to look for other ways of making up for that deficit in logic. So this is an appeal to say that at least at a very personal level, we should look at logic and critical thinking and argument as a good thing and not a bad thing. And we said that an argument can be valid or an argument can be sound. If an argument is valid, it may only be valid and not be sound. If an argument is sound, it has to be valid before it can be sound. So when we talk about arguments can be valid or they can be sound, which means argument can be invalid. And if an argument is invalid, it cannot be sound. Now, what is a valid argument? An argument is said to be valid if the conclusion in that argument follows necessarily from the premises, provided that those premises are true. All right? Provided that the premises are true. Let me just arguments are said to be valid if the conclusion necessarily follow from the premises, provided that the premises are true. Is there any problem? Have we lost audio again? Or all right, are we good? All right. So An argument is said to be valid if the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises, provided that the premises are true. In looking at the validity of an argument, you are just simply assuming that if these premises are true, does the conclusion follow necessarily? And the idea of necessarily means compulsorily. The idea of necessarily means inevitably. So we say that an argument is valid if the conclusion in the argument follows compulsorily from the premises that have been provided, just assuming that those premises are true. So in testing for the validity of an argument, you're not really worried about the truth or falsehood of the premises. You just assume that these premises are true. And based on the assumption that these premises are true, the question is, does the conclusion follow compulsorily? Not possibly, not maybe, not likely. It has to follow compulsorily. So in philosophically or in the academics, we use the word necessarily. That word necessary is a very strong word. It is a word for absolute, compulsory, inevitable. All right? So an argument is said to be valid if the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises, assuming that those premises are true. So, if we say, for instance, that if you overslept, premise 1, if you overslept, you'd be late. Premise 2, you are not late. Conclusion, therefore, you did not oversleep. All right? Therefore, you did not oversleep. This is an argument. And we are saying premise 1 is if you overslept, you'd be late. Premise 2 is you are not late. Conclusion, therefore, is you did not oversleep. This argument is a valid argument. All right? This argument is a valid argument. And let me see if I can put this up for those of you who current slide. All right. Just a minute. I'm trying to. Okay. Just a minute. I'm trying to see if I can. Share this slide. Share screen. Application. Where is it? I think here. I don't know if you can see my screen. Can you see my screen here? Okay. Can you see my screen? You can see my screen. All right. You said it's black. It's there? All right, so you can see my screen now. So that first argument says, if you overslept, you'd be late. That's premise one. Premise two says you are not late. Therefore, that's conclusion. Conclusion is therefore you did not oversleep. That argument is a valid argument. That argument is a valid argument because it follows necessarily that if you overslept, you'll be late, you are not late. It follows necessarily that you did not oversleep. The whole idea of oversleeping is such a determinant of whether you can be late or not, that if you are not late, and we say if you overslept, you would be late, and you are not late, we know that at the very least you did not oversleep. So therefore you did not oversleep. But we can flip this argument and say, if you overslept, you'd be late. And then we say premise two, you did not oversleep. You did not oversleep. Conclusion, therefore you are not late. So we say argument one, if you overslept, you'd be late. You did not oversleep. Therefore, sorry, yeah, okay. All right. Now we say second argument is this: if you overslept, you'd be late. That's premise one. Premise two, you did not oversleep. Conclusion, therefore you are not late. This second argument is not a valid argument. This second argument is not a valid argument. Why? Because we simply said if you overslept, you'd be late. Premise two, you did not oversleep, and conclusion is therefore you are not late. It doesn't follow necessarily. That's the point I want to highlight here. Is the word necessity. That it does not follow necessarily that the fact that you did not oversleep means therefore that you are not late. There are all kinds of reasons why you may not oversleep and you might still be late, including things like, let's say, traffic. All right, the traffic situation could be so terrible on that particular Tuesday that even though you were up early, you left home early, maybe there was an accident on the way and a truck ran into another truck and the road was completely blocked off and there was just no movement anywhere for maybe 2 hours. So the fact that we know that if you overslept, you would be late, and premise two says you did not oversleep, it does not follow necessarily that you are therefore not late. It is possible that you will not be late. It is possible that you will be late. But we said an argument is valid only if the conclusion follows necessarily or compulsorily from the premises, assuming that the premises are true. In the first example, we said if you overslept, you'd be late. And premise two, we said you are not late. The conclusion was therefore you did not oversleep. And we say in this case it is valid because that conclusion follows necessarily from the premises. The premises are that if you overslept, you'd be late. You are not late. It is compulsory that for those two things to have happened, then you did not oversleep. Because if you overslept, you already be late. So, because that's the meaning of oversleeping. So if you are not late, whatever else happened, we are absolutely sure that one of the things is that you did not oversleep. All right, there could be all kinds of other things that you did. It may mean that there was light traffic. It may mean that there was your vehicle was fast. Whatever else it means, in the very minimum, you did not oversleep. To oversleep is to sleep beyond the time. If you overslept, nothing else can make it the case that you would not be late. You get it? If you overslept, nothing else will make it a case that you would not be late. So in that first instance, the conclusion follows compulsorily or necessarily from the premises. The conclusion is you did not oversleep. The premises were if you overslept, you'd be late. The second premise was you are not late. And so we concluded to say you did not oversleep. That argument is valid. But the second argument was if you overslept, you'd be late. Premise 2 was you did not oversleep. And the conclusion was therefore you are not late. And we say this argument is not valid because it is possible that even though you did not oversleep, there could be other factors that come in why you still came late to work. So that second argument is not valid. That if you overslept, you'd be late. You did not oversleep, therefore you are not late. That is not a valid argument. Give another example. If you are in Jos, you are in Nigeria. You are not in Jos. Premise 2, you are not in Jos. Conclusion, therefore, you are not in Nigeria. Now, hear this again. If you are in Jos, you are in Nigeria. You are not in Jos. Therefore, you are not in Nigeria. This argument is not valid. This argument is not valid. Let me put it on the screen for you. From current slide. So there are two arguments here. I'm sorry. All right. Is my screen, is it up? All right. So look at that first argument. If you are in Jos, you are in Nigeria. You are not in Jos. And the conclusion says, therefore, you are not in Nigeria. If you can see my screen, if you are writing out logic, those three dots, which I'm sure everybody tried to use when you were taking notes in your secondary school or university and you were taking dictation, that is also the symbol in logic for therefore, is the three dots that make like a dotted triangle. So that's the shorthand for therefore, and it's used in logic. So premise 1, if you are in Jos, you are in Nigeria. Premise 2, you are not in Jos. All right, conclusion, therefore, you are not in. That argument is not valid because it does not follow necessarily from those two premises that you are therefore not in Nigeria. You can be in Ibadan, or you can be in Oshogbo, you can be in Katsina, you can be in Kano. The mere fact that you are not in Jos does not mean that compulsorily you are not in Nigeria. If you are in Jos, absolutely you are in Nigeria. But if you are not in Jos, maybe you are in Nigeria. All right? It does not absolutely compulsorily follow. I'm trying to help you to get the idea that an argument is valid on the basis of a necessity, that the conclusion necessarily, inevitably, absolutely, compulsorily must follow from the premises. Not possibly, but compulsorily must follow from the premises. And in this case, this conclusion does not follow compulsorily from those two premises in the first argument. Now look at the second one there. It says, if you are in Jos, you are in Nigeria. You are not in Nigeria. And conclusion says, therefore, you are not in Jos. This argument is valid. This argument is valid because, of course, if you are in Jos, you are in Nigeria. But premise 2 says you are not in Nigeria. And the conclusion says, therefore, you are not in Jos. This is very valid. This is valid because Jos is a subset of Nigeria. You have to be in Jos to be in Nigeria. If you are in Jos, you are in Nigeria. That is true. But if you are not in Nigeria, there's no way that you can be in Jos. Absolutely, compulsorily, it follows that if you are not in Nigeria, you are not in Jos, because Jos is a city in Nigeria. It could be that if you are not in Jos, you are still in Nigeria because you are in Kaduna, you are in Calabar, you are in Kano, you could be anywhere else within Nigeria. But if you are not in Nigeria as a country, then there's absolutely no way that you could have been in Jos. So compulsorily, it's compulsory that if you are not in Nigeria, according to premise 2, then you are not in Jos at all. And premise 1 and premise 2, therefore, they lead us to the conclusion necessarily, or the conclusion necessarily follows from those two. All right, let's take this final example here before I move on to some other thing. I hope you can still see my screen. All right, this one says, all singers are brave. All singers are brave. Premise 2 says, joy is brave. Conclusion, therefore, joy is a singer. This argument is not valid. All singers are brave. That's premise 1. Premise 2, joy is brave. And conclusion says, therefore, joy is a singer. Why is this argument not valid? This argument is not valid because even if it is true that all singers are brave, and it is true that joy is brave, it does not compulsorily or necessarily follow that joy, therefore, must be a singer. Because that first premise does not say only singers are brave. If that premise says only singers are brave and premise 2 says joy is brave, then we know that compulsorily there's no chance, there's no other way joy is a singer if we have been told that only singers are brave. But all we are simply told here is that all singers are brave. To say all singers are brave does not mean everybody that is brave is a singer. It just simply means that everybody that is a singer is brave. There could also be brave footballers, there could be brave preachers, there could be some mechanics that are brave. But we are saying for singers, all of the singers are brave. All singers are brave. But it does not mean that bravery is an exclusive quality that is exclusive only to singers. So simply knowing that somebody is brave does not automatically mean that they must compulsorily be singers, because there could be other people that are brave. Actually, the two premises don't give us enough to be able to make that conclusion. So this conclusion, even though it is a possible conclusion, is not a compulsory conclusion. It is possible that joy is a singer, but from the standpoint of an argument, that's not a conclusion that follows from this argument, because that conclusion does not follow necessarily. It doesn't follow compulsorily. If we flipped this argument and we say all singers are brave, and premise 2 now is joy is a singer, then the conclusion would be joy is brave. That would be a valid argument. If we say all singers are brave and we said joy is a singer, then we can conclude and say joy therefore is brave, and this would be a valid argument. Now, we want to do a sound argument. An argument is sound if it is both valid and have all premises true. So an argument is sound, valid, and has all premises true. Is my screen still on the... You said? All right, what happened? No, I don't remember removing. All right, let me put back this screen. Is it back on now?
Yes.
Okay, so an argument is sound. An argument is sound if it is both valid and has all the premises true. That's what it means for an argument to be sound. An argument is sound if it is both valid and has all the premises true. So let me explain that. I said earlier on that an argument cannot be sound and not be valid, but an argument can be valid and not be sound. We said for validity, the conclusion in the argument must necessarily follow from the premises, assuming that the premises are true. So in testing for validity, we just take it for granted. We say, if these premises are true, let's assume these premises are true, would this conclusion follow? If the answer is this conclusion will follow necessarily or compulsorily, we say the argument is valid. But then we go on to ask the next question to say, in soundness, if we want to find out if the argument is sound, we now say, what we assumed before, we don't want to assume anymore. We now really want to check the truth or falsehood of those premises. We don't want to just say, let's assume they are true. Now we want to say, are they indeed true? So an argument is sound if it is both valid and has all premises true. So it has to be valid. That means there has to be a logical consistency or flow in the from the premise leading to the conclusion inevitably. And then those premises also have to be true. So if we look at this, for instance, and we say John is not Nigeria's president. Nigeria's president lives in Abuja. Therefore John does not live in Abuja. This is an argument. John is not Nigeria's president. That's premise one. Premise two, Nigeria's president lives in Abuja. Conclusion, therefore John does not live in Abuja. This argument is not valid. And because the argument is not valid, we cannot even test it for its soundness. We said an argument is sound if it is both valid and all the premises are true. If an argument is not valid, it cannot be sound, because validity is part of the requirement for soundness. So when an argument is not valid, we don't go on to test if that argument is we don't go on to test if that argument is sound. All right, look at this one. No Nigerian under 30 is allowed to vote. No Kurdish student is under 30. Tola is a Kurdish student. Conclusion, therefore Tola is allowed to vote. All right? No Nigerian under 30 is allowed to vote. No Kurdish student is under 30. Tola is a Kurdish student. Therefore, Tola is allowed to vote. Now, this argument is valid if we assume that the premises are true, that no Nigerian that is under 30 is allowed to vote, and that no Kurdish student is under 30. It means all Kurdish students are above 30. And we said Tola is a CATI student. We already now know from premise 2 that there's no CATI student that is under 30, and we know from premise 1 that nobody that is under 30 is allowed to vote. So if there is no CATI student that is under 30, it means CATI students are allowed to vote. All CATI students are eligible to vote. So if we know that Tola is a CATI student, then it follows that Tola is allowed to vote, because the requirement here is age, and we know that Tola meets that age requirement because no CATI student is under 30 and Tola is a CATI student. Now, so this argument is valid, but is this argument sound? This argument is not sound. And why is this argument not sound? This argument is not sound because even though it is valid, all the premises are not true. Which premise do you think is false in this argument? The premise that is false in this argument, obviously, is premise 1. So we can tell that premise 1 in that argument is false. The premise 1 that says that no Nigerian that is under 30 is allowed to vote. That premise is false. Nigerians under 30 are allowed to vote. It is Nigerians under 18 that are not allowed to vote. So yes, there are many Nigerians under 30 that are allowed to vote. So as a matter of fact, premise 1 is not true. And because premise 1 is not true, it means this argument is not sound, but this argument is valid. That means when we assumed that all the premises are true, the conclusion followed compulsorily, necessarily from those 3 premises. But now, we don't want to assume, so we actually now want to check the truthfulness or the truth value of each of the premises, and we realize that our first premise is not true. And the moment one premise is not true, you don't even need to check for the others. You can already tell that that argument is not sound, even though the argument is valid. Now, so when you hear people say, that's not a valid argument, that's not a valid argument, sometimes they actually mean that is not sound, right? The argument could even be valid. People use that's not valid in just everyday language and speaking, but they don't necessarily mean that it is not valid in that sense. But now you know the difference between what is a valid argument and what is a sound argument. I absolutely need to run. Absolutely need to run. Okay, what I want to do now is, having examined a little bit of these issues in terms of knowing what an argument is and a sound argument, a valid argument, the components of an argument, which is premises, conclusions, statements. We've even talked about an assertion. We've defined what a statement is. What I want to go into now, for the sake of application, is to look at some of the fallacies, some of the errors of thinking that are very common, and I'm also going to be looking at some of them that are very common in a politically charged environment or in the political arena. Okay? Number 1 is what is called a straw man. A straw man. A straw man. A straw man is an error of logic, is a fallacy of thinking, is a fallacy of logic. It's a logical fallacy that is made when you misrepresent your opponent's position and then you critique or criticize or you attack that misrepresentation of the position. So you paint a different picture from the actual picture that is the position of your opponent. and you now go on to critique or to attack that misrepresentation of their actual position. If somebody said, for instance, that they do not believe in, maybe in the Nigerian situation, right? If somebody says that they do not believe in this quota system, they don't believe in quota system, to say you have to ensure that you make a specific number of positions available in a particular job recruitment exercise for people from the 6 geopolitical zones, which means that you want to make sure that there's a spread in terms of employment into that particular ministry of the government. Somebody can now come up and say that if you do not support the quota system that tries to make sure that people from the 6 geopolitical zones are all represented, somebody can now say, so you mean that Northerners or Southeasterners, so you don't want Southeasterners to join the Nigerian police force? Well, that's not exactly what you have said. The person goes on now to attack you on the basis of his understanding that you hate people from the Southeast because you said you don't support quota system. But you see, what the person has set up, what the person is attacking, is not your real position. It's a misrepresentation of your position. But that's what he's now attacking. And when he attacks it and he seems to have done a good job, he can now pat himself on the back as having destroyed your position, whereas he has not even engaged it at all. So that's a straw man. The idea of a straw man is that instead of a man that is flesh and blood and bones, like we are, you have a straw, just like what you used to sip soft drink out of its bottle, straw. So is a straw man is a man that is made out of straws. And you can tell that a man that is made out of straw, if you just put straw together with gum and you make the shape of a human being, it's not going to be such a big deal to knock it down. But when you have knocked it down and you go home saying, hey, I defeated a man in wrestling today, all right? You see, that's the idea, that's a graphic idea of what a strawman fallacy is. It is when you have set up a very different, weakened misrepresentation of your opponent's position, and then you go on to attack that misrepresented position of your opponent. However, you leave claiming that you have actually dealt with your opponent's position. That is a fallacy of reasoning that is called strawman. Now, there is something that is called opposition fallacy. Opposition fallacy is a fallacy that is committed when on the basis of dividing people into two groups. So there's a home group and then there's the enemy group. There's a home group and there's the opponent group. And in opposition fallacy, the assumption is that anything that does not come from the home group, if it comes from the enemy or opponent group, it is automatically wrong. It doesn't matter what it is. So if the opposition says we want to end the special anti-robbery squad of the Nigerian police, if that is coming from the opposition, we don't need to look at the basis for that demand. The simple fact that it's coming from the opposition means it has to be wrong. That is opposition fallacy. It's a fallacy of logic that simply tries to say that a position is false because it is advanced by a group that we see as an opposition group to our own group. So in that case, you are not even looking at the merits of the argument, And it's not just because I'm going to talk about a genetic fallacy. Now, this is different from a genetic fallacy because this one identifies the origin to be antagonistic to us. So it is called opposition fallacy. And opposition fallacy is sustained by a division of people into we and them, where cannot be right. That no matter what it is, so long as it is them that advanced it, we don't need to check it in order to brand it as being false. So when somebody says, we want to end SARS in Nigeria, you now say, this chant that people are chanting, is it coming from our side or is it coming from their side? And we say, it's coming from their side. If it's coming from their side, it cannot be right. It must be wrong. We already make that commitment, then we start scrambling for reasons that we can give as to why it must be wrong. But those reasons we are giving, whether they are tenable or not tenable, are not the first things, and they are not the most important thing. The most important impetus is that this position has been advanced by the other group or the opposing group or the opponent's group. That is called an opposition fallacy, where you simply think that something is wrong, a position is wrong, simply because it is advanced by a group that you consider to be an opposition group. Now, there is another fallacy that is called appeal to the crowd. Appeal to the crowd. Appeal to the crowd. And this one is a fallacy of reasoning that is sustained by our native herd instinct. Our native herd instinct. So it's like saying, a lot of people believe that the Hausas are politically enlightened. That's what a lot of people believe. Therefore, the Hausas must be politically enlightened. The only reason why you think that the Hausas are politically enlightened is because that's what a lot of people believe. It's not because you have seen any real proof or you have seen any real argument, you have seen any basis that has been presented in logic or in fact. It is just simply a position that happens to be held by a lot of people. So it is called appeal to the crowd. So it's like, we say, most people believe that pepper is nutritious. Pepper is nutritious. That's what most people believe. You have never done a personal research. You don't know whatever nutritional value pepper has, but you have heard many people say that pepper is nutritious. Therefore, you believe pepper has to be nutritious. That is appeal to the crowd. You are just simply following your head instinct to say, all those people cannot be wrong. All those people cannot be wrong. And in politics, this is a very powerful thing. So this is why propaganda works very well in politics. This is why a lot of social engineering is very effective in politics, because of the appeal to the crowd. That is a very strong human tendency. We have a very, very strong tendency to appeal to the crowd, such that anything that we see that there's so many people going in that direction, we are usually inclined to go in that same direction. So that's appeal to the crowd, where you are taking a position simply because a lot of people have taken that position. You have not studied it, you don't know what the facts are, you just know that the position is held by so many people. That's appeal to the crowd. There is a fallacy that is called beside the point. Beside the point. Now, an argument is beside the point or commits the fallacy of being beside the point if it argues for a conclusion that is irrelevant to the issue at hand. So, you commit that fallacy, the fallacy of being beside the point, if you are arguing for a conclusion that is irrelevant to the issue at hand. It's like we say there is a lot of there's a lot of insecurity in the north under this current government. According to some reports by some of the international news media, over 100 people were killed just in the last few days. The Nigerian government gave a figure of, is it 43? That was what they said was the number of people that were killed in Borno State. Now, and then so somebody begins to say this government needs to do a lot more in order to secure the lives of our people in the north. People cannot just keep dying like this. And then somebody comes up and begins to say to you and gives you very valid reasons why the current president is more financially prudent than the president before him. All right? And so you say, but you know that Mr. President is not corrupt at all. So amount of money has been found that used to go down the drain in this ministry. So amount of money has been found in that other ministry that hitherto was embezzled by the permanent secretaries. And it could be the case that all of the issues you are raising are true and they can be verified, and it can lead to the conclusion legitimately, therefore, that this current government is financially prudent and is also not corrupt in terms of the way that it handles our finances. But you see, that is the fallacy of being beside the point. The point is not about financial probity, it's not about financial integrity or financial accountability. It is about insecurity. We're talking about people dying in the north at the hands of these insurgents. Now, whether the president has succeeded in exhuming all or blocking all the loopholes from which people were embezzling money in the ministries, in different ministries, in previous administration, is beside the point. All right? So you commit the logical fallacy of being beside the point if you are arguing for a conclusion that is irrelevant to the issue at hand. So it's not about the argument you are putting forth not being valid. It's not about the argument you are putting forth not being sound. Your argument can be valid, it can be sound. It is just that it is not relevant to the issue at hand at the moment. And this happens a lot in political discussions. A lot in political discussions. And on both sides, both for the supporters of political figures and political figures themselves. I can't tell you the number of times in the past when our president has been asked one question and he gives an answer and you are wondering, okay, I'm really trying to find a connection between the question and the answer that you have given. It's not necessarily because what he has said is false on its own. It is that it is not related to, it is besides the point, right? It's not relevant to the question that has been asked or the issue that is at hand. This is one of the deflection mechanism or strategy that a lot of politicians use. So you say something that is a weakness in probably a leader's administration, a governor's administration, a president administration, and instead of facing it and dealing with it, he finds a way to start to talk to you about the other things he has achieved. Followers of politicians, they do that a lot. Political party members, they do that a lot. And it is important that you are able to point this fallacy, particularly this fallacy, of being besides the point, because the argument can be very tight, airtight in terms of being valid and being sound, so much that if you are not discerning, it can take you off guard and it may just make you look like a fool. But what the president has simply done is to commit a logical fallacy of being beside the point, because everything he has said may be sound, may be valid, but it is irrelevant to the issue that is at hand. As we try to wind up, there's a whole lot of other genetic fallacies to deal with, but I'm going to pick All right. False dichotomy. False dichotomy. There's a logical fallacy. Sorry, a logical fallacy, not genetic fallacy. Logical fallacy that is called false dichotomy. And a false dichotomy is when a position is presented as, or a situation, a scenario is presented as having only two positive alternatives or two positive outcomes, even though there are actually more than two alternatives. So you present it as if there are only two alternatives, even when indeed there are more than two alternatives. If somebody said, the level of insecurity in Nigeria now is unbearable, is alarming, then the other person say, but at least we don't have corruption as much as we used to have it in the last administration before this one. And they start to make it look as if it is either you have corruption with security, with security, or you have insecurity without corruption. It makes it, it presents an either or situation that is actually false, that is needless. It's like people say, people present a picture that sometimes looks like you can be either rich or you can be honest. I'm sure you've sensed that kind of outlook before, where people make it look like you can be either rich or you can be honest, as if to say that you cannot be both rich and honest. They make it look like there are only two alternatives. That alternative one is you can be rich, and if you are rich, you will be dishonest. The alternative two is that you can be honest. You cannot, they can't conceive a world where one person can be both rich and honest at the same time. So a false dichotomy is when you are making it look like there are only two alternatives, when indeed there are more than two alternatives in the situation at hand. That is a scenario that presents the logical fallacy that is called a false dichotomy. And this happens also a lot in political conversations. So you are asking for ways that the current government, or whatever government is in power, can do better, or that is not doing better. And then they bring the counter position to say, but look at what we have, because you are talking about what we don't have. Almost as if to say, you either have what we have, or you have what we had. You get? There was a previous time when we had A and B. Currently we have C and D, but we don't have A and B. And when we are trying to say, oh, we don't have A and B, you now make it look like, well, remember that when we had A and B, we didn't have C and D, which we now have. And it may be the case that there's nothing inherently inconsistent with having A, B, C, D at the same time. But they present an argument that bifurcates. This false dichotomy is also called bifurcation. Bifurcate means you divide into two. So you set things up as two opposing sides that is either going to be one or the other, to say you can only have either this or that. Meanwhile, the options are more than just those two that you are setting up. This also happens a lot in politics. Okay, maybe I'll deal with this one finally. Genetic fallacy. Genetic fallacy. No, I'll run through maybe two, at the very least two. Genetic fallacy. A genetic fallacy is an error of logic that is committed when a belief or a position is dismissed simply on the basis of its origin. Simply on the basis of its origin. In scripture, there's a popular one. Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? That is a genetic fallacy. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? You are dismissing a position simply because of its origin, simply because of where it's coming from. Or in Nigeria, you say, oh, you believe the service chiefs should be sacked because you are a southerner. All right? there's insecurity, there's a banditry, there is insurgency in Nigeria at the moment, and then somebody say, why doesn't the president dismiss the service chief because they have failed in the discharge of their responsibility? And whereas that person is saying they have failed in the discharge of their responsibilities and therefore should be sacked, what the opponent hears is they should be sacked because you want them to be sacked because you are a Southerner. Okay? That commits an error of thinking that is called a genetic fallacy. You are trying to dismiss somebody's position simply because of the origin of that position. So this position has originated from southern Nigeria. Therefore, we dismiss it. It's called a genetic fallacy. You know, genesis, beginning, all right, origin, that's the idea. So you are dismissing a position simply because of its origin. So you say, we know that you believe the service chief should be sacked simply because you are a Southerner. Well, being a Southerner is not germane to the validity or to the soundness of my argument. If I'm giving you point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, and conclusion, I'm saying, therefore, the service chiefs should be sacked, you are going to have to deal with those points I put on the table and not to appeal to my geographical background as a basis for dismissing my position. But when you do that, when you go ahead to still do that, you are committing an error of thinking that is called genetic fallacy. So that is when you dismiss somebody's position or belief simply because of the origin of that belief. A final one for this evening before we wrap up is appeal to force. Appeal to force. An appeal to force is also an error of thinking that manifests every time that force that force is used to threaten or to intimidate one in order to get a conclusion accepted. So if you say, if you don't agree that I won this election, nobody from your side of the state or your side of the whatever is ever going to be involved in any put in any viable position, or simply to say we are going to unleash the forces of the military or the police force or the vigilante. We are going to unleash them upon you, and there's nothing you can do about it unless you accept that we won this election. It is appeal to force. When you are using the threats or intimidation to get a conclusion accepted, what you are using to get your conclusion accepted is threat or intimidation. It's the same kind of thing that is apparently happening in Nigeria right now. The whole NSAS protest and the way the government is handled it. In parts, you can see there's appeal to force. There's appeal to force. The entire the whole Lekki massacre, as it has come to be dubbed now, is that same kind of thing. When there's an appeal to force, or when force is used as a threat or as an intimidation or as a strategy to getting someone to accept a conclusion that you are putting before them. Parents can do this with their children. Teachers can do this with their students. Parents can do this with their children. Government can also do this with the citizens. And it is important to understand how these errors work in day-to-day conversation so that you can spot them. What I haven't had time, therefore, to deal with is how do you use this knowledge in political engagement and discourses? I'm going to say that first and foremost, it's not helpful in political engagement or even in most conversational engagement to say, oh, You see what you did there? That's the genetic fallacy, or that's appeal to force, or that is opposition fallacy, or that's bifurcation or false dichotomy, or that's equivocation. I didn't deal with equivocation. I didn't deal with disanalogy, begging the question, compact question. I think I should talk briefly on ad hominem. An ad hominem is a logical fallacy that is committed when you attack the person that is proposing a view. When you attack the person that is proposing a view instead of opposing the view that is proposed. So you are attacking the person making the argument instead of attacking the argument. So somebody says, we need to stop the incidents of our farmlands being taken from our farmers by marauders and whatever it is. And then the response is it you, this womanizer, that is talking to us about securing our farmlands from being taken over by marauders? All right? Is it you, a womanizer, who is talking to us about that kind of thing? The personal morality of the person is not germane, relevant to the position they have advanced. But when you are attacking the person and you have not said anything, you have not really made any point against the position or argument the person has made. Instead of attacking the argument, you attack the person. This happens also a lot in politics, where when somebody expresses his view, people try to find dirt on the person as a way to discrediting the person's position. And that is ad hominem. Ad hominem, it's attack to the person. I'm sure you can spot it in the phrasing. We talk of Homo sapiens. So this it's attack to the person. Ad hominem. So an ad hominem is a logical fallacy that is committed when you attack a person that is proposing a position or an argument instead of attacking the argument or position that person has proposed. I see this happen all over the place. I see it on social media, Facebook, everywhere, where somebody comes up and says something, and the next thing is, look at who is talking. All right? Look at who is talking. Sometimes those famous Obasanjo letters that he used to write, a lot of times, depending on where you belong on the political divide, you will see people that will say, forget about the messenger and look at the message. Other people will say, forget about the message and look at the messenger. He was president for 8 years. What did he do? He was president for 8 years. Why didn't he take to his own advice? And then somebody else will be saying, is there any truth in what the man is saying? Can we look at what the man is saying? In a purely logical context, the thing to do will be to look at the point that is made in the person's letter. Now, we are more than logical beings, so of course other considerations will come in, but we are looking at logic and critical thinking. So I'm looking at it purely from a logical standpoint. I'm not looking at it from a broader philosophical spectrum, or even a practical philosophy, or even from a moral standpoint. We are looking at logic. Logic doesn't care about your personal moral standing on other areas, particularly if it is not related to the point that you are making. There is no correlation between, for instance, being a polygamist and not having the legitimacy to speak about insecurity in Nigeria. So it doesn't help to say, is it not this man that cheated on his own son? All right, or jilted his son and took his son's wife? So if anybody is talking to us about how to solve insecurity problems in northern Nigeria, who is going to listen to this man? Is it not the man that? So You have completely disregarded the man's position, the man's argument. You haven't engaged with it. You are now attacking the person that is making that point. That happens a lot in politics, as well as it happens in other places. And it's important to know when that is the kind of thing that is happening. And like I said, I don't have a lot of time anymore to go into how a Christian uses this knowledge, but I will wrap it up by saying, number one, it does not help to start to give the technical jargon or the jargon that you understand logic in logic when you are talking in very normal everyday conversations or even in political discourses. But at the back of your mind, your knowledge of these things, they help you to be very perceptive, and then they help you to be very winsome in the way that you ask questions. So that's what I'm going to say. That one of the greatest ways to use this knowledge is that it should help you to shape the questions that you ask in a political conversation. So when somebody is committing ad hominem attack, an ad hominem whatever, for instance, you can calmly say, okay, I want to be straight on this. I want to be clear on this. Okay? Yes, it is true that this person has more than 3 wives. That is true. And it is true that there is insecurity in the north. That is also true. And this man has said that the security chiefs are supposed to do better than they have done. And because they haven't lived up to that expectation, we should sack them. Can you help me to make sense of how he's being married to more than one woman defeats the position he has advanced in terms of security? That's something I'm not clear about. So what you do is, you don't just attack them back. You try to use the understanding that there's a fallacy here, there's an illogicality here. You use that knowledge to perceptively frame the questions so that the question now start to show the absurdity of what the person is trying to do, even if they weren't aware at the time that they started to do it. If it's a straw man, you simply restate your position in a very different way. I saw this, happen in one of the debates I did in Uganda, and the atheist on the other side of the debate was now beginning to feel very frustrated because what he thought I believed time and time again, he just kept realizing that that wasn't what I believed. And he had come kind of prepared to deal with what he thought I believed. So when he realized that what he thought I believed wasn't what I really believed, it was very frustrating. And I tried to make it as while being as respectful as I could be, that was indeed not what I believed about God. In fact, I remember at one point I said to him that if the God that you are painting a picture of, if that is what I believed that God is, I would not believe in God. That this God you don't believe in, even me, I don't believe in this God. I am an unbeliever in this kind of God, because this is not the God in whom I believe. And so he felt very exasperated. But this happens all the time. When somebody is trying to argue against your position, but what they're arguing against is a misunderstanding of your actual position. And they argue against it so well that they actually feel like they have destroyed the entire edifice of your argument. And the undiscerning crowd or listeners may not even know that this is what they have done. So it takes you asking careful questions and being able to understand the fallacies that are being committed, so that when you have a chance, therefore, to give an answer, or you are able to now restate your position in a way that shows that what the person has been dealing with is not an accurate statement of the position that you have advanced. And on that note, we are going to end our brief study on logic this evening. If you do have questions, you can send. I'd received a few messages inbox, and I'm going to try to respond to them in the course of time. But if you do have questions, you can send in your questions to mordecaiacademy@gmail.com. It is Mordecai Academy, one word, mordecaiacademy@gmail.com. If you have any questions or any comments, you can send them there. Mordecai Academy. Let me write it, the academy. At gmail.com. So, all questions and inquiries to Mordecai Academy @gmail.com. And on that note, we will bring this evening's class to a close. We look forward to your feedbacks, your comments, your questions via the email provided. And then we see you again next week, Monday, when we delve finally and properly into politics of faith and politics. I think the first installment in that series is going to be political ideology. See you on Monday. God bless you.